We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power coming to you from Tbilisi, Georgia. And today what we're going to do is we're going to discuss something I've been thinking about for a while. And you might call it the name of the beast. What is this thing that our culture has been wrestling with? And as Jordan Peterson said, it's easy to describe when the right wing goes too far. You have racism, xenophobia, authoritarianism, dictatorship. But what is it when the left wing goes too far?
All right, so now, in the aftermath of World War II, let's say we've come to some sort of sociological agreement, I would say, that you can identify the radical right-wingers. When people make claims of racial superiority, you put them in a box and you say, well, you're outside of acceptable political discourse. And so you saw that with William F. Buckley in the 60s when he started his conservative review. He dissociated himself from the David Duke types, and you saw it more recently with people, for example, like Ben Shapiro, who immediately distanced himself from the Charlottesville types. Okay, so now we kind of have a sense of where you've crossed the damn line in your ethno-nationalism, right? As soon as you move into the racial superiority domain, ethnic superiority domain, it's like, no, you've got to be dangerous. All right, here's a question. Where the hell do you cross the line on the left? Exactly. Well, the answer is who knows? Well, that's not a very good answer. I would say it's incumbent on people in the center and in the moderate left to say, look, things can go too far on the left. And here's how we know that's happened. And that hasn't happened at all. Now, I think there's a reason for that. I think there's a technical reason as well as a motivational reason. Two technical reasons. It's harder for people on the left to draw boundaries because people on the left aren't boundary drawing types. They're boundary dissolving types, temperamentally speaking. So that's a problem. The second problem is it doesn't look to me like there is a smoking pistol on the left that's as obvious as racial superiority doctrines. You know, it's like in Canada, there's a lot of push for this triumvirate of radical ideas: diversity, inclusivity, and equity. Which diversity, it's like, well, who's against that? It's like being against poverty. Inclusivity, well, yes, of course we want people included. Equity, that's a more bitter pill to swallow because that's equality of outcome. And for me, that's a marker. It's like if you're talking about equality of outcome, you've gone too far.
So that is what we're going to be discussing today. And before we go too far, I'd like to just remind you that if you're not a member of this channel, do subscribe. If you find yourself finding this interesting, hit like. And there is a way in which you can receive audio extras, and that is by contributing $50 or more in one lump, or $10 or more a month through PayPal, link below, and I will send you about 10 hours of audio extras. Let's get on, though, with the subject. I'm calling it the Hydra. Why am I calling it the Hydra? Well, of course, what's the Hydra? The Hydra was a mythological creature. Hercules fought it and slayed it. Interestingly enough, every time he cut off a head, there were about 7 heads, 2 more would appear in its place. Now, there have been filmic representations of it. Jason fought it in Jason and the Argonauts. But it didn't spring two heads. There have been a few video games where the double heads have shown up. Also, there's a great depiction of it in the 67, 68 movie, The Seven Faces of Dr. Lowe, with Tony Randall playing 7 different parts. And at the end, this little sea monster that was in a goldfish bowl gets loose in the rain, grows, and then develops all these heads with very different kinds of heads. And I find that really fascinating because that is the nature of the beast on the left these days. It presents several different heads. And one of the problems is, and as I have been listening to a variety of people, from video game commentators, genre commentators, people like The Critical Drinker or Nerdrotic. I've been listening to people who are involved with Gamergate, like Sargon of Akkad, or people like, Alex Jones, of course, has been out there railing about these things, Paul Joseph Watson, but also people like Neil Ferguson, who is an academic historian. Tom Holland has not been precisely dealing with this, but he has been dealing with some of the issues of where we are in history in books like Dominion. People like Douglas Murray wrote a book very specifically about these things, The Madness of Crowds, in which he deals specifically with 4 different aspects of this new thing. The question is, what's the thing? Now, everyone says, it's wokeism. But wokeism only refers to race, really. That's where the idea comes from. There's also the trans movement, fourth wave feminism. There's a general social justice, but there's stuff like Antifa and critical race theory and Black Lives Matter, all of these slightly different things. And one of the problems is that whenever someone starts talking about one thing, the LGBT issues, suddenly something else will erupt in the Black Lives Matter category. We saw this in 2020 quite often. And interestingly enough, after 2020, which was so much about being woke and race, suddenly the trans issues have become very big in 2021. But so have the others. And it's very tempting to think that we're dealing with a variety of different phenomena. And yet, it's quite clear, I think, to anyone who's spent any time looking at these things, that they are pretty much the same thing. And yet they act so different. They have different agendas, and yet they all seem to be the same thing. And there are other heads besides the ones we have seen. For instance, there's things like PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, and veganism. Now, I don't mean to say that everyone who is a vegan is a part of this, any more than I mean to say that anyone who is LGBT is a part of the new ideologies. Or everyone, obviously anyone working for, racial civil rights, that doesn't make you part of this new thing. This is what makes it so difficult. And I've been trying to understand why this is so. So, for instance, in the Hydra version of PETA and veganism, there's really an anti-humanism to it. And, people would be willing. The interesting thing is, ultimately it's like no cows will be used for food. No pigs will be used for food. If you keep taking it far enough, no dogs will be pets. No cats will be pets. Although cats will always find a way to be a pet, because it's not up to us It's up to them. But nevertheless, and you ask, well, what about all the excess of these animals then? What would you do with them? And if you really dig through the literature, it would be eliminate them. Make the world a perfect place. And in fact, eco-fascism is another hallmark here, using climate change as its raison d'etre. That is to say, we would do anything to have a perfect world. Again, like it ever was perfect. You see, I mean, you have to go back to the Garden of Eden for perfection. Everything else, fallen. And that's the world we live in. But there's not just that. There are many of the things I covered in my conceptual humanity lecture, including like transhumanism, trying to go past the limits of the human body. Kind of this idea of a cybernetic, augmented humanity, genetic modifications, body modifications, cosmetic surgery. All of these things, robo-sex, believe me, go listen to Conceptual Humanity if you think I'm exaggerating something here. All of these things will all be a part of the same beast. If they're not already, we just haven't seen the heads. For instance, which head controls the beast? Right now, it seems like the woke head does often. And yet I'm convinced it's not the real head. It's not the monster head. The monster head will probably be something more like a very misanthropic eco-fascist head. That is to say, everything will be subsumed under the umbrella of repairing the world, you see. So what is the name of the beast? That is the question. You see, because I'm calling it the Hydra, but the Hydra is only a description of the characteristics of the beast. It is not the name of it. And why is the name important? Well, like a demon, in every exorcism movie, and in every true exorcism, you have to get the demon to confess what it is, who it is. And so far, all of the aspects of this thing every time you come up and say, why are you suppressing free speech in the name of being racially perfect, in the name of not offending anyone, in the name of, trans rights? Why are you suppressing free speech? If you ask a question like that, it'll be turned back on you in such a way as to assume that even that question all by itself is somehow totally suspect, that one shouldn't be allowed to ask that question. And it's the slippery nature of this thing that really gets to me. Now, I've been watching and listening to people talking about this stuff for a while. And it's like the proverbial, blind man with the elephant in the room, or blind men with the elephant in the room, where one touches the tail and thinks it's a snake, and one touches the legs and thinks it's a tree, and someone else touches the tusks and thinks it's, I don't know, what would you think the tusks are? Well, pretty sharp, well, pretty dangerous, pretty hard. In other words, you're going to get these different impressions of what the thing is. And I think this is what we're dealing with here. And one of the reasons, people keep saying that we are, there's a way in which people keep trying to make sense of this. There's a way in which various commentators have tried to delineate the shape of the beast. I think Douglas Murray's Madness of Crowds did as much as anyone. So did Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind. And yet, it goes on. You can't point these books to people who are inside of these movements and say, look, this is you. They don't acknowledge it. They just think, oh, that's just right-wing propaganda. Like gay Douglas Murray and, very centrist, center to left Jonathan Haidt are somehow equated with, and you always hear this particular word, far-right extremists. They're not. There's plenty of people, lesbians who, TERFs, who don't want to sleep with guys with testicles. And they're like, what's going on here? There's a lot that's it's like it's hard to get the shape of this thing. And because no one has been able to, and I'm not saying I know the shape. In fact, part of the reason I'm doing this video is to simply put it out there. We need to work on this together. And I don't mean just the people on this channel, obviously. I mean all the people who are trying to figure out what this thing is. Because right now we're not doing that good a job. I mean, when I see people describing it, it's like what'll happen is we'll go through different periods where suddenly someone's idea of what it is takes predominance. So, for instance, people were watching that Yuri Bezmenov video, and suddenly it was communism. It's communism again. Then someone else calls it cultural Marxism. And someone else says, no, it's postmodernism. And someone else says, it's wokeism. And someone else says, no, it's really critical theory, which in this version is critical race theory. Michael Knowles in a recent video says, I know what it is. Critical race theory. It's all just the criticisms. It's just criticize. And we just have to stop them from criticizing. We have to address, we can't address their criticisms because there's a certain point at which they are irrational.
So, we have a lot of people who are talking about political correctness, but what do you think is the conservative answer to defeating it? Because I feel like for the longest time, the right has just been playing offense incompetently. What can we do to change that?
Yes, we have been so incompetent on it. And I think it's because we don't know what political correctness is. I think political correctness is very simple. It is a purely negative campaign to destroy traditional standards in our traditional society. That's all it is. And very intelligent leftist theorists developed it over about 100 years, but that's what it comes down to. People sometimes talk about critical race theory or critical theory. They say, it sounds so complicated. It's really not complicated. The theory is to criticize. That's the whole thing. So the left wants to destroy the traditional standards and way of life.
But he's wrong. It's not, that's just what they do. That's not what it is. I get up in the morning, I eat breakfast, I go about my day's work, I, enjoy spending time with friends. That's just what I do. That's not who I am. And there's a separation there. That doesn't describe me inside of myself. Tim Pool said something different. He said, what these really are is identitarians.
Yeah, I say wokeness because critical race theory has some specific ideas. And there are derivative ideas that don't rest inside the writings of critical race theorists, like and they use these semantic games to manipulate. So perhaps identitarianism might be a better way to describe it. And the reason I like saying identitarianism, it's effectively the etymology is identity plus, government, form of government.
Yeah.
So you have government on the basis of race.
Right.
Granted, it's very vague considering everything they're talking about because it's deeper than just government or policy. But they're very much so pushing a way of life and policy based on your race. Very much so like the Nazis did. And so if you want to find that common factor between the authoritarian groups, do they hold the same economic views? No, of course not. Right. And it becomes very silly when people say, oh, so-and-so's a fascist. It's like the fascists had specific views on the state and corporations. And the Nazis had very specific views on race. Authoritarianism is the better word, but that's really broad. The thing that binds these with the similar with what we've seen in the past 100 years is racial identitarianism combined with authoritarianism.
There's truth to all of these things. There's aspects of Marxism, aspects of various forms of ideology, and yet we have not found out what this is yet. That is, say, in such a way, it's not like we haven't figured out the confession yet. We haven't heard the beast. We haven't pointed it. We haven't trapped it into a corner yet. Because every time we cut ahead, you cut the wokeism head and critical theory and Black Lives Matter spring out of it. Every time you go after it, it keeps going. And so if you say to someone, well, you're really this, they will say, no, we're really this too. We're this and this. And there is no name we have for the whole thing. Like I say, Tim Pool says it's Identitarianism. Well, that would also make it very similar to extreme right-wing beliefs as well, which there are a lot of similarities. And yet it's not the same thing, unless one wants to posit that eventually these things will come together, which is an interesting idea. But I think the problem is if you look at what I pointed out as some of the other heads, like the eco-fascists or the veganism or the transhumanism, these aren't like that at all. These are not people's quest for identity. But there is a misanthropic quality to so much of this. And one of the interesting things is that it never accepts definitions. So here's three things I see, and there are more. I am purposely leaving this a bit rough because I think we all need to work on this together. And whatever ideas you have, go ahead and put them in the comments section. Again, if you just say they're stupid right-wing Democrats, you don't need to write that in the comment section, because that in itself is a stupid response. That's missing the point of what I'm saying. That is to say, if you've got that kind of just want to label them, yeah, they're just communists. No, you don't need to write that down in the comment section. That's not going to help anybody. I'm actually asking us to seriously work on what's going on here. So one of the first things I see is it never accepts definitions of itself. And yet it is extremely specific. In other words, it is not as amorphous as it claims to be. It is not, I mean, a lot of this comes out of the 60s. A lot of it comes out of postmodernism. And the 60s and postmodernism are two different things. The 60s is more like new agey, relativistic, and postmodernism is more philosophical. Like I said, there's a lot of stuff that's collided together here. So, and ever since the 60s, people have been saying like, let's, like relationships, let's not call it anything. Let's just let it be. So we're no longer husband and wife. We're no longer boyfriend, girlfriend. We're partners, whatever that means. It's like when someone says, this is my partner, I'm going like, do you have a contract for that since you've entered into some sort of financial arrangement? Because that's what a partner is, isn't it? But that's the thing, is that definition in itself is super loose with these people. So we can say one characteristic of the bees is it refuses definition, by definition. Another one is that it wants to end Christianity. It wants to end humanism. It wants to end Western culture. It wants to end democracy. And I would go on from there. It wants to end Judaism and anything connected to the Judeo-Christian line. I think given enough time, it wants to end Islam as well, because that's connected to the Abrahamic religions. It finds temporary connection in the name of, one of the weird heads of this thing is also this anti-border idea of everyone should be allowed in. Open immigration, open borders, and in that, Islam is part of the mix. Well, Islam is obviously, at loggerheads with many of the concepts of the thing. Nevertheless, it is expedient to use it for a while to help unearth some of these other things, but in the end, they will turn to it as well. And here is another aspect. So, aspect number one, it does not accept definitions, period. So, when these people say, judge not lest you be judged, they are not talking about moral condemnation. They are talking about making judgments of any sort. They are talking about making categories. Okay, second thing, it wants to end all the old stuff. It believes in the new. John Lennon's Imagine is a perfect song for these people. It only believes in the dream, which is not a postmodern thing. Third, it takes the Martyrdom Playbook from Christianity and then spins it on its head. Now, in official Christian history, martyrs, particularly during the Roman period, were killed at different points at different times. It didn't happen all the time in the Roman Empire, but at certain places and times it did. And then what would happen is that people would look at those things and go like, wow, those people had courage. But here's what the martyrs of that era never did. They never used their martyrdom to pressure the Roman government. Why? They couldn't. Otherwise, they would be killed. Now, what's interesting today is every question about these people, every question about these ideologies, everything that happens that is, if this is why, if you try to uproot the LGBT ideology, as recently happened in Georgia, a bunch of burly guys went and attacked the Pride office. Well, you know what? You're just handing them the victory. That is the propaganda, because it turns into a propaganda coup. So, and this is what makes it very difficult. You can't come directly for these people and question them. You can't use logic on them. You cannot, because what they do is they take the Martyrdom Playbook. Oh my goodness, we're being attacked. But they do what the Christians never did with it in the past. They use that as an attack back on you. So, you've attacked us, therefore we need new rules to suppress attackers. And this is, in a sense, every step has been won this way, if you look at the history of all these things. So I think there's a real division in the civil rights lineage between Martin Luther King's world and then Malcolm X's world, which then leads to things like the Black Panthers. You get into the politics of resentment. And in the politics of resentment, you have definitely, it's a model for how to gain advances. We're no longer, you see, Martin Luther King was influenced by Gandhi. Gandhi was influenced by Christ. So Gandhi realized that if he didn't do anything and let the other people attack him, they would look bad. But what he didn't do was turn it around and then attack those people. Same with Martin Luther King. He realized if we sit quietly and let the dogs and the fire hoses and the police truncheons attack us, the people, especially with television, the people attacking us will look really bad. And that was using the Martyrdom Playbook, you might say, the right way. The wrong way, however, is to then take any little attack and use it as a weapon against the attacker. So, this happened in Nazi Germany. Well, it didn't actually happen in Nazi Germany. It happened in Paris. There was a left-wing guy who was responsible for killing somebody. So, what the Nazis did, he happened to be Jewish and left-wing. So, the Nazis then took that and used it as an excuse back in Germany for what they call Kristallnacht. And that is, it was the night of the broken glass. It was the night when attacks on Jews were openly permitted. This is actually how the Martyrdom Playbook is used against everybody who comes at these people. Now, there are more aspects to this, including the relationship of these supposed ideologies of, liberating oppression and the corporate structure. And this is a big part of the ideology. But I'm just throwing this out there right now. I want you to think with me and pass this video around to people who might, again, think with all of us and help us to find out, see if we can get the thing to confess its name. Because by doing so, we will weaken it. And I have no illusion that this will be easy. This may take 10 years to do. Because right now, by misusing the Martyrdom Playbook, it cannot be attacked directly without claiming victim status, and therefore claiming new laws against the victimizers, who may not be attacking them at all. If simply being asked questions is an attack, then there is no room for freedom anymore. Okay, so I'm going to end this here. This was just I just wanted to get this off my chest. And again, I am asking you to think about what this thing is. I've been pondering this, and I am not a culture warrior in the sense that I'm always like looking for, I'm not like, oh, those damn people, I just see that we're running into a really dangerous zone here. And since the election of the recent president, more and more things have been pushed through in the name of desperation, really, but in the name of, we proved that we were right. More children's books with what? Woke, positive messages? Again, this is the problem. We don't have the answer. Shall we say, proper Hydra messages. Now, I think Hydra is a good name, again, to describe what kind of an animal it is, but not what it is. What the name of what it is has to, like communism explains what it is, fascism explains what it is, democracy explains what it is, capitalism explains what it is. What is this? That's the question. Thanks for listening. This is Byrne in Tbilisi, Georgia, reminding you to swim against the stream and ask questions. There are answers. They may not be immediate and warm, but ask.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.